Welcome to Monk's Moon Temple. Let's begin with something you might not have considered. Right now, as you're listening to this, your body is having an experience. There's the weight of your body against whatever surface is supporting it. There's the temperature of the air on your skin. There's the subtle sound of your own breathing, moving in and out, like a quiet tide that never stops. But chances are, you weren't aware of any of this until I just pointed it out. Why? Because your attention was somewhere else. It was caught up in thoughts about the day ahead, or memories from yesterday, or judgments about whether this recording would be worth your time. Your attention is like a spotlight, constantly moving, constantly illuminating something, rarely resting on the simple fact of being alive in this moment. Now here's the question that matters. What if your attention has been shining on the wrong things? What if the reason you feel heavy, exhausted, or dissatisfied isn't because life is hard, though it can be, but because you've been pointing your spotlight at burdens that were never yours to carry in the first place? What if peace isn't something you have to achieve, but something that's been waiting for you to simply stop looking away from it? A psychologist might call this selective attention. We see what we're trained to see. If you're constantly scanning for threats, you'll find them everywhere. If you're constantly measuring yourself against others, you'll always find yourself lacking. Your attention shapes your reality. And for most of us, our attention has been hijacked by patterns we didn't choose, habits we never consciously developed, and beliefs that were handed to us before we were old enough to question them. The Buddha observed this same phenomenon 25 centuries ago. He called it ignorance, not in the sense of being stupid, but in the sense of not seeing clearly. We stumble through life half asleep, reacting to things automatically, assuming our thoughts are facts, and wondering why we feel so trapped. He offered a radical alternative. Wake up. See clearly. Understand what you're actually holding. And then, put it down. But putting things down isn't as simple as it sounds. Because the things we carry, they've been with us so long they feel like part of us. Imagine a man who's been carrying a heavy backpack for years. He's worn it so long that his shoulders have curved forward to accommodate the weight. His muscles have adapted. His posture has permanently changed. Now imagine someone comes along and says, "Just take off the backpack." The man might say, "But if I take it off, I'll fall backward. I won't know how to stand straight. This backpack is who I am." And he's not entirely wrong. The backpack has shaped him. But the truth is, he can learn to stand straight again. It will take time. It will take practice. But the weight was never meant to be permanent. There's an ancient story about this very thing. A woman named Channa lived in a coastal village. She was a fisherwoman, strong and capable, known for her ability to haul in nets that would take 3 ordinary people to manage. Every morning before dawn, she would walk to her boat, row out into the bay, and spend hours pulling fish from the water. But there was something strange about Channa. Even after she docked her boat, even after she'd sold her catch and walked home, her shoulders remained hunched, her hands remained curled slightly, as if she were still gripping ropes. Her neighbors noticed. They'd say, "Channa, the work is done. You can rest now." But Channa didn't know how. The gripping had become so automatic, so deeply ingrained, that she did it in her sleep. Her husband would wake her some nights because her hands were clenched so tight her nails were digging into her palms. One evening, an old monk came through the village. He was traveling to a monastery in the mountains and stopped to ask for water. Channa gave him a cup from her well. As he drank, he studied her. He saw the tension in her jaw, the permanent furrow between her brows, the way her shoulders didn't move when she breathed. He said, "Daughter, what are you still holding on to?" Channa was confused. "I'm not holding anything," she said. She showed him her empty hands. The monk shook his head. "I don't mean physically. I mean here." He touched his own chest. "What are you holding here?" Channa had no answer. She'd never been asked that before. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed and for the first time, instead of thinking about the next day's catch, instead of mentally rehearsing the movements she'd make with her nets, she just lay there and felt. And what she felt was a constant, low-level gripping. Not in her hands, but in her chest. In her stomach. In her throat. A holding. A bracing. As if her entire body was waiting for something bad to happen. She realized, with a shock, that this feeling had been there as long as she could remember. It had started in childhood, after her father drowned in a storm. She'd been 7 years old. She remembered standing on the shore, watching the waves, waiting for his boat to appear. It never did. And something in her had decided, that day, that she would never be caught off guard again. She would always be prepared. She would always be gripping, always be ready, always be braced for the next storm. She'd been 7 years old when she picked up that stone. And now she was 47, still carrying it, still braced, still waiting for a storm that might never come. This is the first teaching. Not about fish or storms, but about what you're holding that you don't even feel anymore. The weight you've adapted to. The tension that's become your new normal. The Buddha said that suffering is not optional, but the suffering that comes from clinging, from grasping, from holding on when we could let go, that is optional. The first step is simply to notice. Not to fix. Not to change. Just to notice. So here's an invitation. Right now, wherever you are, just take one breath. A deep one. And as you exhale, see if you can notice any place in your body that's holding on. Your jaw. Your shoulders. Your stomach. Just notice. Don't try to relax it yet. Just become aware of it. That awareness, that simple noticing, is the beginning of freedom. Because you can't put down a stone you don't know you're holding. If what you're hearing is resonating, if you're starting to sense the weight of stones you've been carrying, please take a moment to subscribe to Monk's Moon Temple. This path is best walked with others. Subscribing ensures you won't lose the trail as we go deeper. The second burden is one you might not even recognize as a burden because it feels so much like who you are. It's your environment. Not just the room you're in, though that matters. It's the people you spend time with, the content you consume, the conversations that fill your days, the energy that surrounds you when you wake up and when you go to sleep. All of it is seeping into you constantly, like water seeping into a sponge. And you don't notice it because it happens slowly. It happens gradually. It happens one small exposure at a time until one day you realize you're living in water that's completely different from the water you intended to swim in. Think about it this way. If you put a drop of blue dye into a glass of clear water, you'll see it immediately. It spreads, it colors everything, you can't miss it. But if you put that same glass under a slowly dripping faucet, each drop is clear. One drop, nothing. Another drop, still nothing. But after an hour, after a day, the water in the glass has been completely replaced. You didn't see it happen. There was no dramatic moment. But the water you're in now is not the water you started with. This is how your environment works on you. The anxious friend you talk to every day, their anxiety becomes your background noise. The news feed you scroll through every morning, its outrage becomes your emotional baseline. The cluttered room you sleep in, its chaos becomes the organizing principle of your mind. Modern psychology has a name for this. It's called embodied cognition. The idea is that your mind isn't just inside your head. It extends into your surroundings. The spaces you inhabit literally shape how you think and feel. A cramped room makes your thinking cramped. A beautiful view literally expands your cognitive horizons. This isn't metaphor. This is measurable brain activity. You are not separate from your environment. You are in constant conversation with it. And if that conversation is mostly noise, you will feel mostly noise inside. The Buddha was remarkably direct about this. He said, "Associate with the wise. Do not associate with fools." This sounds harsh until you understand what he meant. He wasn't making moral judgments. He wasn't saying some people are good and some are bad. He was making a practical observation, like saying don't drink poisoned water. The people around you, the spaces you occupy, they are the water you drink. And you can tell yourself you're strong enough to handle poison. You can develop a high tolerance. But tolerance isn't health. It's just getting used to being sick. There's a story about a man who learned this in the hardest possible way. His name was Javaka and he was a merchant's son in a bustling trade city. His father had built a respectable business trading in spices and cloth. Nothing enormous, but enough to provide a comfortable life. When his father died, Javaka inherited the business along with a modest fortune. He was young, 22, and suddenly wealthy. He had no experience managing money and no one to guide him. One evening, he wandered into a tavern near the docks. He'd never been to such a place before. His father had warned him against it. But his father was gone now and Javaka was curious. The tavern was loud and smoky. Men laughed too hard and drank too much. Women moved between tables with trays of wine. At a corner table sat a group of young men, well-dressed, confident, clearly regulars. One of them, a man named Sujata, noticed Javaka standing alone and waved him over. "You look lost, friend," Sujata said with a grin. "Sit with us. We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" Javaka asked. Sujata laughed. "Does it matter? We're alive, aren't we? That's reason enough." Javaka sat. The wine flowed. The conversation was lively, full of schemes and stories and jokes that felt edgy and exciting. By the end of the night, Javaka felt like he'd found something he didn't know he was missing. Belonging. Excitement. A break from the lonely responsibility of running his father's business. The gatherings became regular. First once a week, then twice, then nearly every night. Javaka's home became the preferred meeting place because it was large and he never said no. His new friends praised his generosity. They called him brother. They told him he was living the right way, not like his father who'd worked himself to death for nothing. Javaka felt seen. He felt alive. He ignored the small voice that occasionally whispered about the dwindling accounts, the neglected business, the servants who gave him strange looks in the morning. 2 years passed. The fortune that should have lasted a lifetime was nearly gone. Javaka's health had declined. He coughed constantly. His hands shook. He couldn't sleep without wine. His friends were always there, always suggesting one more venture, one more gamble, one more night of celebration that would surely turn things around. Until the morning he woke up and they were gone. All of them. The house was empty. The servants had left. The furniture was sold or stolen. And in the crushing silence, Javaka sat in the debris of his life and understood his father's warning for the first time. He hadn't been corrupted by bad people. He had chosen to swim in poisoned water. And he had drunk it willingly, day after day, until poison felt normal and health felt foreign. Your environment might not look like a dockside tavern. It might look like an office where everyone complains. It might look like a social media feed filled with comparison. It might look like a friendship that's more draining than nourishing. The poison is harder to see because it's familiar. But here's the question. What water are you swimming in? And is it making you stronger, or is it slowly, invisibly, drowning you? You don't have to change everything at once. Just notice one element. One person who leaves you depleted. One source of information that agitates your nervous system. One corner of your home that makes you hold your breath. Just notice it. That noticing is the first step toward choosing different water. The third burden is one you might be carrying right now, this very moment, without realizing it. It's the burden of your patterns. Those automatic responses that play out beneath your awareness, the scripts you follow without knowing you're following them. You have patterns for everything. How you react when someone criticizes you. What you do when you feel anxious. How you speak to yourself when you make a mistake. These patterns were formed years ago, sometimes decades ago, and they've been running ever since, quietly, efficiently, whether they still serve you or not. Think of your mind like a field. The first time you walk across it, you leave a faint trail. The second time you walk the same path, it's a little easier because the grass is already bent. After 1,000 walks, that path is a deep groove, almost impossible to leave. Your patterns are those grooves. They feel like reality because they're so worn in. But they're not reality. They're just habits. And habits can be changed. Psychology calls this neuroplasticity. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on what you do and think. The patterns you repeat become stronger. The ones you don't, weaken. This is either terrible news or wonderful news, depending on your patterns. If you're stuck in a groove of self-criticism, your brain has become expert at finding your flaws. But if you start practicing self-compassion, even a little, that new path will slowly, over time, become the deeper groove. The Buddha described this with the word sankhara, often translated as mental formations. He taught that these formations are the building blocks of our suffering. We react automatically because the formations are so deeply embedded. We think we're making choices, but often we're just running old programs. The good news is that you can observe these formations. You can see them clearly. And in seeing them, you begin to loosen their grip. There's a story about a man named Kosiya who was trapped in a pattern he couldn't even name. Kosiya was a farmer, but not a very successful one. His fields produced less than his neighbors. His crops often failed. But the problem wasn't the land. The problem was Kosiya's pattern of giving up. Every season, he would plant his seeds with enthusiasm. He would tend the young plants carefully. But the moment something went wrong, a dry spell, a few weeds, a pest problem, he would stop. He'd walk away from the field and sit under a tree, waiting for the season to end. His wife would plead with him. Just water the fields. Just pull the weeds. But Kosiya couldn't. Something in him would shut down. The pattern would take over. And another harvest would be lost. One year, a wandering monk passed through the village and noticed Kosiya sitting under his tree while his fields wilted. The monk sat beside him in silence for a long time. Finally, he said, "What are you waiting for?" Kosiya shrugged. "What's the point? Something always goes wrong." The monk said, "Show me your field." Kosiya led him to the edge of the parched land. The monk walked slowly through the dry furrows, bending occasionally to look at the struggling plants. He came back to where Kosiya stood and said, "Your plants are thirsty. They need water." Kosiya said, "I know. That's why I gave up." The monk looked at him with curiosity, not judgment. "That's a strange connection you've made. Thirsty plants mean you should give up. Most people would think thirsty plants mean they should get water. Where did you learn that connection?" Kosiya had never been asked that before. He thought about it. And suddenly, an image came to him from childhood. He was 7 years old. His father had planted a small garden and given Kosiya responsibility for watering it. Kosiya loved it at first. He watered every morning. But one week, his father got sick and the household was in chaos. Kosiya forgot to water. When he finally remembered, the plants were wilted, brown, dying. His father, exhausted and worried, saw the dead garden and shouted at Kosiya. "You see? This is what happens when you don't pay attention. You can't fix things once they're broken. You just have to start over." That moment had lodged in Kosiya like a seed. And it had grown into a pattern. When things start to go wrong, don't try to fix them. Give up. Start over. The pattern had protected him from his father's anger all those years ago. But now, at 50, it was destroying his life. The monk listened to Kosiya's story and said, "That 7-year-old boy did the best he could with what he knew. But you're not 7 anymore. The plants in your field are thirsty, not dead. They can still be saved. The question is whether you'll water them based on a 50-year-old lesson or based on what's actually in front of you." Kosiya stood there for a long moment. Then, slowly, he walked to his well, filled a bucket, and carried it to his field. He poured the water at the base of the first plant. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. He didn't save the whole field that day. But he saved some. And the next day, he saved a few more. The pattern didn't disappear overnight. For weeks, he'd still feel the urge to give up, to walk away, to sit under the tree. But now he could see it. He could name it. And in seeing it, he had a choice he never had before. What patterns are running in your life? The urge to please everyone until you're exhausted. The reflex to criticize yourself before anyone else can. The habit of reaching for your phone the moment you feel uncomfortable. These patterns aren't you. They're just paths worn into the field of your mind. And you can, slowly, patiently, begin to walk a new one. The fourth burden is perhaps the heaviest because it feels the most justified. It's anger. Not the brief flash that tells you a boundary has been crossed. That's just information. It's the anger you store. The grievance you rehearse. The grudge you polish and hold up to the light, examining it from every angle, keeping it alive long after the original wound has healed. This stored anger is like a fire you keep feeding long after you should have let it burn out. And you're the one who gets burned. From a psychological perspective, holding on to anger is one of the most destructive things you can do to your own body and mind. When you're angry, your body releases cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate increases. Your blood pressure rises. Your digestion shuts down. Your immune system weakens. If you stay in this state chronically, you are literally damaging your organs, shortening your lifespan, and shrinking the parts of your brain responsible for rational thought and emotional regulation. The person you're angry at might not even know you're angry. They might be living their life completely unaffected while you're poisoning yourself from the inside. The Buddha said something remarkably clear about this. He said, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say anger is wrong. He didn't say you shouldn't feel it. He said holding on to it burns you. The feeling arises naturally. That's human. The question is what you do with it once it arrives. There's a story about a woman named Kisagami who learned this through an experience that would have broken most people. Kisagami was a mother. She had one child, a son she loved more than anything in the world. When he was still young, he fell ill and died. Kisagami was devastated. She refused to accept it. She carried her son's body through the village, begging everyone she met for medicine that would bring him back. People tried to tell her it was hopeless, but she wouldn't listen. She couldn't listen. Her grief had become a fire that consumed everything else. Finally, someone directed her to a healer who lived outside the village. She walked for hours, carrying her son, and found the healer sitting under a tree. The healer looked at her with great compassion and said, "I can help you. But first, you must bring me a mustard seed from a house that has never known death." Kisagami's heart lifted. Finally, someone who could help. She went to the first house in the village and asked for a mustard seed. The woman there gladly gave her one. Then Kisagami asked, "Has anyone in this house ever died?" The woman's face softened. "I'm sorry," she said. "My mother died here last year." Kisagami moved to the next house. They gave her a mustard seed, but when she asked her question, they told her about their father who had died 5 years ago. House after house, mustard seed after mustard seed, the same answer. Everyone had lost someone. Everyone knew death. As the sun began to set, Kisagami sat down by the road with her son's body beside her. She looked at the houses around her, each one lit from within, each one sheltering people who had loved and lost. And for the first time, her anger began to cool. Not because her grief was gone. That would never leave completely. But because she saw that her suffering was not unique. It was not a punishment directed at her personally. It was the shared condition of every being who has ever loved. The fire of her anger had been fueled by the belief that she had been singled out, that this injustice had happened specifically to her. When that belief dissolved, the fire had nothing left to burn. She buried her son that evening. She didn't stop grieving. But she stopped suffering in the way she had been suffering. She stopped fighting reality. She stopped demanding that the universe give her back what it had taken. And in that release, she found a kind of peace she hadn't believed possible. Your anger might not be about something as devastating as losing a child. It might be about a betrayal, a disappointment, a hurt that still stings when you think about it. The question is not whether you had a right to be angry. You probably did. The question is whether you're still holding the hot coal. And if you are, who is it really burning? Think about someone who wronged you. Not a minor annoyance, but a real hurt. Notice what happens in your body when you bring them to mind. Does your jaw tighten? Does your chest get hot? Does your stomach clench? That's the coal. That's the cost you're still paying. The other person might not even remember what happened. They might be living their life completely unaffected. But you're still carrying the weight. Releasing anger doesn't mean approving of what happened. It doesn't mean becoming friends with the person who hurt you. It doesn't even mean telling them you forgive them. It means deciding that you will no longer let the past poison your present. It means putting down the coal so your hands can be free for something else. This is not a one-time decision. It's a practice. The anger will return. The story will replay. Each time it does, you have a choice. Pick up the coal again, or notice it, acknowledge it, and let it be. Over time, the gaps between the anger and your response will grow. And in those gaps, you'll find something you may have forgotten was possible. Peace. The fifth burden is the most deceptive because it disguises itself as a solution. It's your compensation methods. Those things you reach for when discomfort arises, not because you need them, but because they distract you from what you're actually feeling. Shopping when you're not looking for anything specific. Scrolling when you're not seeking information. Eating when you're not hungry. Working when you're already exhausted. Staying busy when stopping would mean facing something you'd rather not face. None of these things are bad in themselves. Shopping provides what you need. The internet contains useful information. Food nourishes your body. Work accomplishes real things. They become problems when they become substitutes. When they're not responses to genuine needs but attempts to fill a void that can't be filled from the outside. It's like trying to fill a bottomless bucket with water. No matter how much you pour in, it never stays full. Psychology calls this avoidance coping. You're not dealing with the underlying issue. You're just distracting yourself from it. And distraction works, temporarily. That's why it's so addictive. The uncomfortable feeling arises, you reach for your familiar compensation, and for a moment, the feeling goes away. Your brain learns that reaching for that thing equals relief. So you reach again. And again. Until the reaching becomes automatic and you've forgotten what you were originally reaching to avoid. The Buddha identified this pattern as tanha, often translated as craving. But craving isn't just wanting things. It's the fundamental restlessness that comes from not being at peace with what is. You feel a lack, an emptiness, a discomfort. And instead of sitting with it, you reach for something to make it go away. The problem is, the thing you reach for can never address the root. It can only provide temporary relief. So you need more. And more. And the cycle continues. There's a story about a wealthy man named Ananda who discovered this in a way that changed his life. Ananda had everything that money could buy. Palaces, gardens, servants, jewels, the finest foods, the most beautiful clothes. He traveled constantly, seeking new experiences, new pleasures, new ways to feel alive. And yet, underneath it all, there was a persistent emptiness. A sense that something was missing, though he couldn't name what. His compensation method was acquisition. Whenever the emptiness arose, he would buy something. A new painting, a new horse, a new piece of land. The moment of acquisition felt electric. For a few hours, sometimes a day, the emptiness would recede. Then it would return, deeper than before. And he would need something bigger, more expensive, more rare to push it away again. His palace filled with things he'd bought and never looked at again. His stables filled with horses he never rode. His land stretched farther than he could survey. And still, the emptiness remained. One day, walking through the market, he saw an old woman selling simple clay pots. She sat on the ground with her wares arranged around her, humming softly to herself. Her clothes were worn. Her hands were rough. She had nothing that Ananda would consider worth owning. And yet, her face was peaceful in a way his had never been. He stopped and watched her for a long time. Finally, he approached and said, "Old mother, how can you be content with so little?" She looked up at him with kind eyes. "Young sir, how can you be discontent with so much?" The question stopped him cold. He had never considered that his wealth might be irrelevant to his happiness. He had assumed that if he just had enough, he would finally feel satisfied. But here was someone with nothing who had what he lacked. He sat down beside her on the ground, something he would never have done before. "Tell me," he said, "what is your secret?" She laughed softly. "No secret, young sir. I just want what I already have. And I have it, so I'm content." Ananda sat with this for a long time. Want what I already have. He had spent his entire life wanting what he didn't have. His attention was always on the next acquisition, the next experience, the next thing that would finally make him whole. He had never once considered that wholeness might already be here, underneath the wanting. He had never once sat still long enough to find out. He didn't become a monk. He didn't give away his wealth. But something shifted. The next time the emptiness arose and his hand reached for something to buy, he stopped. He just sat with the emptiness instead of running from it. It was uncomfortable. It was deeply uncomfortable. But he noticed something. The emptiness, when he didn't try to fill it, wasn't actually a void. It was more like space. Open, available space. And in that space, for the first time, he could feel something else. Not lack. Presence. Your compensation methods might be different. Food, alcohol, social media, work, exercise, even helping others. The form doesn't matter. The function does. What do you reach for when discomfort arises? Not to judge yourself. Everyone has compensation methods. They helped you survive. The question is whether they're still serving you or just running on autopilot. The next time the urge arises, try an experiment. Wait. Just for 60 seconds. Don't reach for anything. Just feel what you're feeling. The boredom, the anxiety, the loneliness, the restlessness. Feel it in your body. Where is it? What does it actually feel like? You might discover that the feeling is bearable. Unpleasant, yes. But bearable. And underneath it, you might find something you've been missing. Not a void to fill, but a presence to inhabit. The sixth burden is so close to you that you probably can't see it. It's like a pair of glasses you've worn so long you've forgotten they're there. It's the ego. That sense of a separate self that navigates the world, that distinguishes between me and you, mine and yours, success and failure. The ego isn't bad. It's necessary. You need some sense of self to function in the world. The problem isn't having an ego. It's making everything about that ego. It's filtering every experience through the question, what does this mean about me? Someone cuts you off in traffic. The egocentric response is, how dare they disrespect me? Someone doesn't invite you to an event. The egocentric response is, what did I do wrong? Someone succeeds where you failed. The egocentric response is, I'm not good enough. Everything becomes personal. Everything becomes a reflection on your worth. And this is exhausting. It's like walking through the world with your skin peeled back. Every slight, every criticism, every neutral event interpreted as an attack, wears you down. Psychology calls this egocentrism or a fragile sense of self. When your identity is shaky, you need constant validation. You need to be right. You need to be seen. You need to be special. And because the world can't provide this constantly, you're in a state of perpetual lack. Always reaching, always defending, always comparing. The Buddha's teaching on anatta, or not self, isn't about erasing yourself. It's about seeing that the self you're so desperately defending is not as solid as you think. It's a collection of changing thoughts, feelings, sensations, all bundled together and labeled me. When you see this clearly, the need to defend it relaxes. You can stop fighting for your story and start living your life. There's a story about a famous courtesan named Mbapali who learned this lesson in the most unexpected way. Mbapali was renowned throughout the region for her beauty, her wit, her charm. Princes and merchants vied for her attention. Poets wrote verses about her. Young women dreamed of being her. She lived in a palace filled with servants, dressed in silks and jewels, entertained by the finest musicians. Her identity was everything. It was the only thing she had. But Mbapali had a secret. Every night, when the guests left and the servants retired, she would sit alone in her room and look at herself in a mirror. And what she saw terrified her. Beneath the makeup, beneath the carefully arranged hair, she could see the faint beginnings of change. A tiny line here. A slight softening there. Nothing anyone else would notice. But she noticed. And she knew what it meant. Her beauty, the foundation of her entire identity, was temporary. It was already beginning to fade. And when it was gone, what would be left? Who would she be? This fear drove her. She compensated with more elaborate costumes, more dramatic performances, more desperate attempts to remain the center of attention. But the fear only grew. Until one day, she heard that the Buddha was coming to her city. He was staying in a mango grove outside the gates. She had heard stories about him. They said he was beyond such things as beauty and youth and status. They said he was free. She didn't understand what that meant, but she wanted it. She wanted to be free from the fear that was consuming her. She went to the grove, but not in her usual finery. She went in simple clothes, without makeup, without jewels. She found the Buddha sitting under a tree with a group of monks. When he saw her approaching, he didn't look away in disapproval or leer with interest. He just looked at her with the same compassion he looked at everyone. She sat down before him and said, "I am Mbapali. Everyone knows my name. But I don't know who I am. Can you help me?" The Buddha smiled. "Mbapali," he said, "show me the one who is asking the question." She was confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm right here. I'm asking." He said, "You point to yourself, but what are you pointing to?" "Your body. That changes every moment. Your thoughts. They come and go. Your feelings. They rise and pass. Your reputation. That depends on what others think. So what is this self you're so worried about losing?" Mbapali sat with these questions for a long time. She had spent her entire life building and protecting an identity that, when examined, had no solid foundation. It was like a castle made of clouds. Beautiful from a distance, but nothing to hold on to. And in that realization, something shifted. The fear didn't disappear immediately, but it lost its grip. Because the thing she was afraid of losing wasn't real in the way she thought. It was a story. A collection of habits and appearances and beliefs. And stories can change. She didn't renounce her life. She returned to her palace. But she returned differently. The next time a prince praised her beauty, she smiled and thought, "That's just a story." The next time she saw a young woman more beautiful than herself, she felt a pang of envy, then let it go. Because that was just a story too. She was no longer trapped in the drama of her own importance. She could enjoy her life without needing it to be permanent. She could appreciate beauty without clinging to it. She could be Mbapali without being consumed by her. Where is your ego most sensitive? Where do you feel most defensive? That's the place where you've mistaken a story for yourself. When the sensitivity arises, just notice it. Ah, there's the story of me being threatened. Don't fight it. Just see it. And in that seeing, the story loses some of its power. The cloud thins. And the sky behind it, the sky that was always there, becomes a little more visible. The seventh burden is the most constant, the most pervasive, and the one you might not even recognize as a burden because it's been with you your entire life. It's mental noise. The endless stream of thoughts that runs through your mind from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep. Planning, remembering, judging, worrying, rehearsing, regretting. Most of these thoughts are repeats. The same worries cycling through again and again. The same self-criticisms playing on a loop. The same conversations replayed and reimagined. Your mind produces tens of thousands of thoughts every day. Most of them you don't even notice. They run in the background like a radio that's always on, quietly draining your attention, your energy, your peace. You wonder why you're tired even when you haven't done anything physical. It's because your mind has been running a marathon all day while your body sat still. Psychology calls this the default mode network. It's the part of your brain that activates when you're not focused on anything in particular. And what does it do? It wanders. It thinks about the past and future. It engages in self-referential thinking. It generates the narrative of your life. And here's the crucial finding from neuroscience. A wandering mind is an unhappy mind. Studies show that people are less happy when their minds are wandering than when they're fully present, regardless of what they're doing. The mental noise itself is a source of suffering. The Buddha described the untrained mind as a monkey swinging through trees, grabbing one branch, letting it go, grabbing the next, never resting, never still. The monkey doesn't choose where to go. It just reacts. Your mind does this with thoughts. One thought appears, you grab it. Then another, you grab that. Before you know it, you're halfway through a forest of worry and you don't remember how you got there. The practice isn't to stop the monkey. That's impossible. The practice is to become the tree. To be so steady, so grounded, that the monkey can swing all at once and you remain unmoved. There's a story about a monk named Mahinda who spent years trying to quiet his mind. He would sit for hours, sometimes entire days, trying to achieve perfect stillness. But the thoughts kept coming. Memories from childhood, plans for the future, judgments about his practice, doubts about his progress. He fought them with everything he had. He pushed them away. He scolded himself for having them. He redoubled his efforts. And the thoughts only grew louder. One afternoon, exhausted from another failed meditation, he walked to a nearby stream to cool himself. He sat on a rock and watched the water flow past. Leaves floated on the surface, carried along by the current. He watched one leaf travel downstream, catch on a rock, spin for a moment, then continue on its way. He watched another leaf do the same. And another. The stream didn't fight the leaves. It didn't try to hold them back or push them forward. It just flowed, letting the leaves be carried naturally. Mahinda sat there for a long time, watching. And slowly, an understanding began to dawn. What if his mind was like the stream? What if thoughts were like leaves? What if the problem wasn't the thoughts themselves, but his relationship with them? He had been trying to stop the stream. He had been fighting the very nature of his own mind. No wonder he was exhausted. He returned to his meditation spot, but this time he didn't fight. He sat, and when thoughts arose, he just watched them. Thought about food. Just a leaf. Thought about the past. Just a leaf. Thought about whether this was working. Just a leaf. He didn't grab them. He didn't push them away. He just watched them float by on the surface of his awareness. And something remarkable happened. The thoughts didn't stop. They never stopped. But they stopped controlling him. They lost their charge. They became just mental events, not commands, not truths, not emergencies. Mahinda continued this practice for weeks, months. The thoughts still came. His mind still produced its endless commentary. But he was no longer caught in it. He could sit in the middle of the storm and remain dry. Not because the storm had stopped, but because he had stopped being the storm. He had become the space the storm moved through. Your mind will always think. That's its job. You can't stop it any more than you can stop your heart from beating. But you can change your relationship with your thoughts. You can stop believing every thought that arises. You can stop following every thought wherever it leads. You can watch them come and go like leaves on a stream, without getting caught in the current. Try this right now. Just for a moment, notice the next thought that appears. Don't judge it. Don't follow it. Just notice it. Thought about past. Thought about future. Thought about this practice. Just a leaf. Just a mental event passing through awareness. You are not your thoughts. You are the one noticing your thoughts. That noticing, that awareness, that's what you really are. And that awareness has never been disturbed by a single thought. It's like the sky. The clouds come and go, but the sky remains. Unchanged. Untouched. Always there. The eighth burden is the most subtle and the most ironic. It's the burden of your beliefs. Not just any beliefs, but the ones you hold most dear. The ones you're certain about. The ones that feel like truth itself. And here's the irony. Even beliefs about letting go, about peace, about enlightenment, can become burdens if you cling to them too tightly. Think of it this way. A map is useful. It helps you navigate unfamiliar territory. But if you become so fascinated with the map that you forget to actually travel, the map becomes an obstacle. If you start believing that the map is the territory, that studying the map is the same as making the journey, you'll never actually arrive anywhere. You'll just accumulate more and more detailed maps while remaining exactly where you started. Psychology has a concept called cognitive fusion. It's when you become so fused with your thoughts and beliefs that you can't distinguish them from reality. You believe your interpretations are facts. You believe your judgments are truths. And this fusion creates suffering because your thoughts are often inaccurate, unhelpful, or just plain wrong. The goal isn't to get rid of thoughts. It's to defuse from them. To see them as mental events, not as the way things actually are. The Buddha was remarkably clear about this. He said his teachings were like a raft. If you're trying to cross a river, you build a raft. It's essential. You can't cross without it. But once you've reached the other shore, you don't put the raft on your back and carry it through the forest. You leave it at the riverbank. The teachings are for crossing, not for clinging to. Even the most profound truth becomes a burden if you carry it past its purpose. There's a story about a scholar named Nagasena who learned this lesson from the most unlikely teacher. Nagasena had studied every text, mastered every philosophy, memorized every discourse. He could debate anyone on any topic and win. His reputation spread throughout the land. People came from distant kingdoms to hear him speak, to watch him defeat rival scholars, to bask in his intellectual brilliance. One day, a simple monk named Sapaka came to the monastery where Nagasena taught. Sapaka had no education. He could barely read. He had spent the last 20 years living in a small hut in the forest, meditating, growing his own food, speaking to almost no one. But there was something about him that stopped people. He moved with a quality of ease that was almost unsettling. When he sat, he was completely present. When he spoke, his words had a weight that had nothing to do with their content. Nagasena heard about this monk and was curious. He invited Sapaka to his quarters for tea. As they sat together, Nagasena found himself strangely uncomfortable. He was used to being the smartest person in any room. He was used to people deferring to him, seeking his wisdom. But Sapaka just sat there, completely at ease, asking no questions, seeking nothing, offering nothing. The silence became uncomfortable. Finally, Nagasena blurted out, "Don't you want to know what I've learned? Don't you want to hear my teachings?" Sapaka smiled gently. "I'm sure your teachings are wonderful," he said. "But I've already drunk the water. I don't need to read the description of it anymore." Nagasena felt a flash of anger. How dare this ignorant monk dismiss his life's work? But underneath the anger was something else. A question. What if Sapaka was right? What if all his knowledge, all his arguments, all his carefully constructed philosophy was just a description? What if he had been studying the menu instead of eating the meal? He asked Sapaka to stay. And over the following weeks, Nagasena did something he had never done before. He stopped trying to understand and started trying to experience. He stopped debating and started sitting. He stopped accumulating knowledge and started paying attention to what was actually here. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. His mind kept reaching for concepts, for explanations, for the familiar ground of intellectual understanding. But Sapaka kept gently bringing him back. Not to a concept. To the moment. To the breath. To the simple experience of being alive. Months passed. And slowly, gradually, Nagasena began to taste what Sapaka had been talking about. Not enlightenment, not some dramatic transformation. Just a growing sense that the truth he had been seeking in texts was already here, in the space between thoughts, in the simple awareness that had been present all along. The texts weren't wrong. They just weren't the destination. They were pointers. And he had been so busy studying the pointer that he had forgotten to look at what it was pointing at. What beliefs are you carrying that might have become burdens? It could be a belief about how you should meditate. It could be a belief about what enlightenment should look like. It could be a belief that you're not making enough progress. It could be a belief that you have to understand everything perfectly before you can truly practice. Any belief, no matter how true, becomes a burden when it blocks direct experience. Any map becomes a cage when you forget it's just a map. The invitation is to hold your beliefs lightly. To use them when they're useful and set them aside when they're not. To remember that the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. And that the most important thing is not to have the right beliefs, but to actually look at the moon. We have walked a long path together. 8 burdens named and examined. The weight you've carried since childhood. The environment that shapes you without your knowledge. The patterns that run automatically beneath awareness. The anger you've been feeding like a fire that burns only you. The compensations you reach for when discomfort arises. The ego that makes everything personal. The mental noise that never stops. The beliefs that have become cages. But here's the truth that changes everything. You are not any of these burdens. You are the one who has been carrying them. And the one who carries can also set down. Think about it this way. Imagine standing at the ocean's edge holding a handful of sand. Your fist is clenched tight. The sand presses against your palm, some grains digging in, causing discomfort. You've been holding it so long your hand has cramped. Now imagine opening your fingers just slightly. The sand begins to fall. Not all at once. Some grains cling. But as your hand relaxes, more and more falls away. And when your hand is finally open, empty, you can feel something you'd forgotten. The air on your palm. The freedom of an open hand. The sand is still there on the ground, available if you need it. But you're no longer gripping it. You're no longer defined by it. This is what letting go feels like. Not losing something. Not becoming empty in a negative sense. Just releasing what was never yours to hold in the first place. The sand was never part of your hand. It was just something you were gripping. And when you stop gripping, your hand returns to its natural state. Open. Available. Free. The Buddha didn't teach that you should have no burdens. He taught that you should see them clearly. Understand their nature. And then, when you're ready, put them down. Not because someone told you to. Because you see that carrying them no longer serves you. Because you're tired. Because your arms ache. Because you remember, dimly, what it felt like to be empty and it wasn't so bad. It was actually a relief. There's a final story. A woman spent her whole life collecting stones. She started as a child, picking pretty ones from the riverbank. Then she picked stones that reminded her of things, happy moments, sad moments, people she'd lost. Then she picked stones others gave her, their expectations, their judgments, their disappointments. By the time she was old, she was bent double under the weight. Stones in every pocket, a bag over her shoulder, a sack on her back. She could barely move. But the stones were her life. They were all she had. One day, she came to a bridge over a deep river. On the other side was a garden. Peaceful. Green grass. Blooming flowers. People sitting under trees, doing nothing, just sitting. She wanted to go there. But the bridge was old and narrow. She wasn't sure it would hold her weight. A monk sat on the near side watching her struggle. "What's in the bag?" he asked. "Stones," she said. "Memories. Hurts. Regrets. Fears. Expectations. Disappointments. They look heavy," he said. "They are. Have you considered leaving them here? Leave them. They're mine. They're all I have. But they're keeping you from crossing," he said. She looked at the bridge, then at the garden, then at her bags. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then slowly, she lowered the sack from her back. The thud when it hit the ground was surprisingly soft. She emptied her pockets. stone after stone. Some she'd held so long she'd forgotten they were there. When she finished, she stood up straight for the first time in decades. Her back didn't hurt. Her shoulders were loose. She could breathe. She looked at the monk, who smiled. She looked at the garden on the other side, still there, still peaceful. Then she stepped onto the bridge. It was easy. She crossed without effort. On the other side, she sat under a tree and did nothing. Just sat. Just breathed. Just was. You are that woman. The stones you're carrying are the burdens we've named. Some you've held so long you've forgotten they're there. But you can put them down. Not all at once. Maybe one at a time. Maybe just loosening your grip on one today. The bridge is waiting. The garden is waiting. And on the other side of letting go, there's nothing you need to become, nothing you need to achieve, nothing you need to prove. Just you, without the weight. Just you, breathing. Just you, finally home. Thank you for walking this path with me at Monk's Moon Temple. May you find the courage to open your hand. May you find the peace that was always there, waiting for you to stop holding on. Until next time.